Thank you very much, everybody. I'm very pleased to see His Excellency Sheik Manssour bin Mussallam, the Secretary General, which I already have talked about you earlier, so people know you. He is an extremely eloquent orator and a great leader. I am so impressed about the organization. So I'm very happy to invite him to make some remarks. He actually has said, since the speeches have already been done, might not be important, but we insisted we have to hear from you, Sheikh. So I am very honored to welcome Secretary General Sheikh Manssour bin Mussallam to the stand and give us a remark. And thank you very much, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me first start by thanking warmly Arts TV for this very kind invitation, and most importantly, for having entrusted me with such an important honor and responsibility that is of addressing you today on this joyous occasion that is Africa Day. Of course, I am not the one to inform you that this Africa Day is, of course, a very special one that marks 60 years since the peoples of this continent gave body to their common noble aspiration for liberty through unity by establishing the Organization of African Unity. And of course, this aspiration, this sense of belonging, but there is no better word for it, this sense of a community of destiny that led to the creation of the Organization of African Unity, what would come to be the African Union. This sense is one that deeply resonates with me, both personally and institutionally as the Secretary General of the OEC. Because as most of you are probably aware, I myself, and perhaps unfortunately, am not at least a natural-born son of Africa. And I come myself from the Arab world. And the truth is, that sense of a community of destiny, that sense of sharing a collective future on the basis of a region, of a continent, of peoples, is nevertheless one that resonates. And it resonates because as an Arab, I am also, in a certain sense, the heir, as all Arabs are, of an aspiration, of a dream for Arab unity, for Arab integration, aware of belonging to a world, to a motherland. And therefore, when I hear the Pan-African slogans, when I hear the great fathers of Pan-Africanism, Thomas Sankara, Nkrumah, it resonates with me because I recognize fundamentally that aspiration of being one in the fact of being many. And the fact that this echoes with me, ladies and gentlemen, as an Arab, I must state, because I said that it resonates with me on a personal basis, but it also resonates with me institutionally. And institutionally, as I am not fully aware of what was discussed before my arrival, but I know that my Under-Secretary General Julius Machunguzi, has done a brilliant job of eloquence in explaining a little bit, I think, of the OEC. Just enough so as not to take my place. Your turn will come. As you are aware, the OEC is the first intergovernmental organization of the South, bringing together countries from Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, the Arab world, and Asia. And I think that the OEC is in a good position to state that this feeling of a community of destiny that exists on this extraordinary continent, the one that exists in the Arab world in which I grew, also echoes across our countries and regions of the South. In Latin America and the Caribbean, where the dream of La Patria Grande, Nuestra América, continues to survive since the era of Simón Bolívar and José Martí, to Southeast Asia and the Pacific that recognize that there is no future for them if not in the collective. And therefore, this Africa Day is almost, at its heart, by its aspirations, the door for me to say that Africa Day is all of our days across the South. And of course, as some of you may be aware, we are recent comers to Addis, a beautiful city that has generously received us and where we have inaugurated our headquarters last week on the 18th of May, on what was OEC Day, as proclaimed by our member states, to commemorate the entry into force of our constitutive charter. And I consider it to be a beautiful game of fate that is particularly symbolic that OEC Day occurs precisely 1 week before Africa Day. And I consider it to be symbolic, ladies and gentlemen, not only for a game of numbers or in order to have something to state, but because I think that it represents our conviction at the OEC. Our conviction that is about South-South cooperation, bringing our countries across 3 continents together. And our conviction, fundamentally, is that there is no South-South cooperation capable of answering our aspirations as peoples, giving answer to our dreams and ideals without authentic, complete, regional integration. And this Africa Day is an opportunity for us at the OEC to ratify our commitment to support and work with the African Union. And I say this knowing that I have the honor of being in the presence of one of the longest serving staff members and officials of the African Union. And to her, of course, I express my entire admiration. That we are ready to work with the African Union and work with our member states on this continent to strengthen, to accelerate the African integration, the African unity that is necessary for true South-South cooperation. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, and at the risk of confirming my reputation as an interminable speaker, The truth is that cooperation and unity, integration are all meaningless if they are not based upon a vision of the Africa we want, a vision of the South we want, a vision of the future that we want. And ours at the OEC is the conviction that we are not just interested in any future where we are united. We want a unity. We aspire to a unity that is based upon principles, upon ideals, upon values that we all share. And to summarize really the OEC vision of the future that we want, it centers on 4 core mandates of the OEC, in fact. And I'll be very quick about those, which are a future of balanced and inclusive education systems. Education systems that are transformed with a vision from the South. Education systems that emancipate themselves from the legacy of eras long gone and reflect who we are as peoples, as individuals, as societies, in order to enable us to become who we want to be. A vision where we strengthen collectively by mutualizing our resources, our transdisciplinary research capacities. COVID-19 seems a lifetime ago, but we have only just emerged from it. And our responsibility on this Africa Day is not only to celebrate. Of course, celebrate we must, but we must also take stock of our successes and our shortcomings in order to get better and better at answering the aspirations of our youth. And one of our responsibilities, therefore, is that of taking lessons from COVID-19. And one of those lessons is that we must strengthen our scientific research capacities, because we cannot depend on others in this regard. You will recall, of course, that this continent, ladies and gentlemen, was not asking for charity during COVID-19. It wanted to purchase vaccines, but it couldn't, because some had monopolized those vaccines. And therefore, we must build our scientific capacities. But also, we must renew dialogue with areas of knowledge that have been historically marginalized, delegitimized, which are our endogenous knowledge, our ancestral knowledge, our traditional knowledge, not all of which is good, but some of which has much to bring to the modern conversation. And also because, ladies and gentlemen, it makes no sense that we are sending our youth to Canada, as much as I love Canada, at minus 17 degrees Celsius to study, out of all things, tropical medicine at minus 17 degrees. Or that young people from this continent go to London, or from the Arab world, in fact, to London, to SOAS, in order to study what? African studies, or Middle Eastern studies, leaving Jordan for Middle Eastern studies in London. And therefore, we must strengthen our capacities, the exchanges between our youth across regions, in areas that are fundamentally of interest to our countries. We must also develop endogenous technologies, another thing that COVID taught us. The techno-digital divide is not one that will be bridged by importing costly, proprietary, closed-source technologies. Because in 3, 4, 5 years, those technologies, with the exponential development of technology, with the fourth industrial revolution, will be obsolete. And we will find ourselves exactly in the same position in which we find ourselves today, but having spent millions of dollars in purchasing technologies. And therefore, we must develop our endogenous technologies, be they local, national, or indeed regional, so that our countries can become drivers rather than mere passengers of the fourth industrial revolution. Harnessing the creative power of our youth, stimulating our economies, and articulating more contextualized technologies. And finally, one of the fourth mandate of the OEC that I think resonates in this continent and in other continents of the South is that of transforming the international financial architecture. During COVID-19, ladies and gentlemen, when an unprecedented issuance of special drawing rights of approximately $650 billion was issued, most of it went to those that needed it the least: the United States, Europe. Only 7% came to this continent, to this entire continent, which was not even enough to cover the expenditures that were generated in mitigating COVID. In 2021 alone, our countries, not just Africa, but the global South, our countries collectively paid more than $400 billion worth in debt service, which is more than double, ladies and gentlemen, the so-called development aid that we have received in the same year. And therefore, we must come together to both ensure that we get the debt relief that we need, a debt relief that was already spoken about at the Organization of African Unity here in this city by Thomas Sankara. Debt relief. Not because we do not want to respect our engagements, but because we want to invest where it matters, in our education systems, in our health systems, in our infrastructure. And we must also build instruments that enable us to secure better financing at better interest rates, longer maturity times, financing that we need for our development with less conditionality. And invest in 6 strategic sectors. And I promise I'm getting close to the end. 6 strategic sectors, because we need to address, and this is what Africa Day, I believe, is about. We need to address the structural weaknesses of our economies that generate our dependencies. Because we're often told, as countries of the South, that our economies should be directed to tourism, cater to tourism. And whereas we have no problem with tourists, if our economies depend on tourism, in economies that have still not achieved energy sovereignty, have still not achieved food sovereignty, have still not achieved high value-added industrialization, what this mass of tourists as an economic policy means is that we suddenly need to import more food, import more fuel, import more cars. And what we receive with one hand, we give out with the other. And therefore, we must invest in 6 sectors: balanced and inclusive education systems, integral health systems, sustainable agriculture and food sovereignty, renewable energy and energy sovereignty, endogenous technology development, and infrastructure and high value added industrialization. Infrastructure, even though we are told that it is no longer fashionable to finance it, because there is no regional integration without the infrastructure for integration. Because let us be clear, the colonial infrastructure that we inherited was not an infrastructure that connected our countries. It went from the mine to the port. And high value added industrialization. Because let me give you an example. I consider, ladies and gentlemen, coffee to be the greatest symbol of the South. Because it is the only plant whose fruit is absolutely universal, but that only grows in the South. In Latin America and the Caribbean, in Africa, in this country, of course, first amongst equals, the Arab world and Asia. But it also represents the shortcomings of our development models and our aspirations for development. I remember recently, ladies and gentlemen, I was in several visits, and I was invited to meet with someone in particular. And in a country, of course, that is one of the greatest producers of coffee. I assure you it was not here. And they asked me if I wanted coffee. And because I am a man that is weak in the face of temptation, I said yes. And I was brought a small jar of Nescafe, which basically means that in this country, green beans were sold that were processed in Switzerland or in France or in the United States, processed, put in a jar, and sold back to the country that produced it in the first place. And that is no longer sustainable. We must invest, therefore, in our high value-added industrialization. We must not only produce in our countries, we must transform within our countries. And we are determined from the OEC to support that. And to support that through South-South cooperation amongst countries that I know are very diverse in their histories, very diverse in their cultures and their daily realities, but countries that share systemic aspirations and challenges. Because ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, unity only can occur through diversity, not despite diversity. Because you cannot unite what is already homogeneous. You only unite what is different. And of course, in short, we must, ladies and gentlemen, avail ourselves of this Africa Day to commence the labor, the work of giving birth to our aspirations and our ideals, of building a third way of development from the South, by the South, yet for the entirety of humanity. And in this regard, I must also recognize, in particular, Arts TV. But this recognition that I give to Arts TV is not necessarily the most pleasant one, because it recognizes with admiration, but it also gives you a lot of responsibility, a burden that you must carry, and that is of accompanying this collective process in media to ensure that our narratives, our views, our perspectives are reflected in the international debate. Because we can no longer sustain the narratives in the media where we are guilty as the premise. And the work that you do at Arts TV, and that I hope that you will continue to do, is one that must take into account this colossal, gigantic responsibility. And from the little that I have been able to learn in the short time that we have known each other, I know that you are on that path. And for that, you have my gratitude and my admiration. And finally, and I stop here, just on a whimsical ending, because I do like whimsical endings. There is a poem which is not from the South, but the quality of poetry is that it is so visceral, so essential, that it knows, despite the fact that it is mirrored in language, it is inseparable from language. The proper of poetry is that it is so very human. It is the true, or at least the essential, sociology and psychology of our societies. And there is this poem that I like to remember every once in a while, and that I hope might be of some use during this Africa Day. And with my apologies, because I am not doing, of course, by reciting it, any justice to those words. But this poem goes along and says, "Come. Come, let us mock at the great, that toiled so hard and late to leave some monument behind, nor thought of the leveling wind. Come, come, let us mock at the wise, with those calendars whereon they set old aching eyes. They never saw how seasons run, and now but gape at the sun. Come, come, let us mock at the good, that fancied goodness might be gay, and sick of solitude might proclaim a holiday. Wind shrieked, and where are they? Mock mockers after that. Mock mockers after that, that would not lift a hand maybe to help good, wise, or great, bar that foul storm out. For we traffic in mockery. And ladies and gentlemen, I should like to thank you and invite you to ensure that ours be not the business of trafficking in mockery, but ours be, on this Africa Day, of coming together to finally give birth to humanity's long overdue humanity.